September 13th, 1940. The air is thick with smoke. Over the skies of London, the relentless drone of German bombers fills the air, their shadows casting a fleeting darkness upon the city. Below, the streets burn buildings, reduced to rubble. Streets lined with the broken remnants of a once thriving metropolis. The relentless barrage of bombs falls upon the heart of Britain's capital, yet the spirit of the people refuses to shatter. For hours, the skies thunder with the clash of war. And yet, amidst the chaos, there is something unmistakably resilient. A quiet defiance in the face of destruction. Inside a command bunker, amidst the clatter of teletypes and the constant hum of the war effort, a man stands tall. His name is Winston Churchill. To many, he is the last bastion of hope. As the city burns and the flames lick the edges of the horizon, Churchill's voice will soon resonate across the world, urging Britain to stand firm, to fight, and to never surrender. The enemy believed Britain would collapse. The German officers predicted a swift end to the island's resistance. But they underestimated one thing: the will of a nation, bound not by its military might alone, but by the unyielding determination of its people. This was the moment when the course of history shifted. The origins of Britain's war against Nazi Germany trace back to the events of 1939. In the early months of that year, Europe stood on the precipice of disaster. Adolf Hitler's ambitions had reached their zenith. His blitzkrieg tactics had already shattered Poland, and the forces of Nazi Germany moved unchecked across Europe. As the thunderous march of the Wehrmacht continued, Britain, under Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, remained committed to maintaining peace. But peace was quickly slipping beyond reach. On the 3rd of September 1939, Britain declared war on Germany after the Nazi invasion of Poland. This was the culmination of months of growing tension, diplomatic failure, and the realization that appeasement had only emboldened the Führer. For Britain, this declaration marked the beginning of a brutal and uncertain journey. But even in those early days, few could have foreseen the depths to which the war would plunge the nation. Winston Churchill, then a member of the British government, had long been a voice of warning, a proponent of military preparedness and defiance against fascism. Chamberlain, in contrast, had hoped that diplomacy and negotiation would stave off conflict, but his efforts failed to prevent the war. By May 1940, after a series of military setbacks, Chamberlain resigned, and Churchill was appointed as Prime Minister. In the days leading up to his ascent, Britain's military situation appeared dire. France, Britain's closest ally, was on the brink of collapse. The German invasion had shattered French defenses, and the Nazis quickly advanced through Belgium, overwhelming the French and British forces stationed on the continent. As the British Expeditionary Force was pushed back to the sea, a desperate evacuation at Dunkirk saved over 330,000 men, a miraculous feat, but also a stark reminder of how precarious Britain's position had become. Yet, even as the shadow of defeat loomed large, Churchill's resolve was absolute. His leadership would be the key to Britain's survival. The new Prime Minister immediately recognized that Britain stood alone against the Nazi juggernaut. But he also knew that Britain's greatest strength was not its military might alone, but the indomitable spirit of its people. Churchill's first speeches as Prime Minister would set the tone for the dark days ahead, promising defiance, resistance, and above all, hope. The Battle of France was over. By June 1940, the once mighty French army had surrendered, and Britain stood alone against the might of Nazi Germany. The German forces, having swiftly rolled over Europe, now turned their attention to the British Isles. The question on everyone's mind was simple. How long could Britain hold out? Could the island, surrounded by hostile seas, fend off a German invasion? For many, including the German officers who had expected Britain to crumble, the answer seemed clear. Britain would be forced to negotiate peace, just as France had done. But Britain was not yet ready to concede. The British government, now firmly under Churchill's leadership, made a crucial decision: to fight on, regardless of the odds. At the heart of this decision was the understanding that Britain's survival was not merely a matter of military strength. It was a matter of willpower, of the spirit to endure when all seemed lost. As German forces prepared for Operation Sea Lion, their planned invasion of Britain, the skies over the Channel would become the battlefield for the future of Europe. The Royal Air Force, RAF, became the last line of defense against the German Luftwaffe, which had already proven its devastating capabilities in Poland, France, and the Low Countries. The Battle of Britain began in earnest in the summer of 1940 as Hitler sought to achieve air superiority, the critical precondition for a successful invasion of the island. The Germans believed that Britain could be forced into submission through relentless bombing campaigns, targeting airfields, radar stations, and civilian centers. But they underestimated the strength of Britain's air defense and the resilience of the British people. The RAF, though outnumbered, held its ground, fighting not only for survival, but for the future of the free world. The iconic Spitfire and Hurricane, along with newly developed radar systems, played a pivotal role in turning the tide. The pilots of the RAF, many of whom were volunteers from across the Commonwealth, knew they were facing what seemed like impossible odds. But they stood resolute. In the halls of the Reich, the idea that Britain would fall was a foregone conclusion. Many German officers, including those close to Hitler, expected that once the Luftwaffe had gained dominance over the skies, Britain would have no choice but to sue for peace. But Churchill, along with his inner circle, understood that this was a battle for more than just control of the skies. It was a battle for the soul of Europe. As the German Luftwaffe roared overhead, the streets of London and other British cities became arenas of human endurance. The Blitz, a relentless bombing campaign that began in September 1940, brought terror and destruction to the heart of Britain. For months, the sky would light up at night with the flash of bombs. Yet, amidst the destruction, the British people displayed an unparalleled resolve. In London's East End, families huddled together in air raid shelters, clutching onto each other as the world outside seemed to shatter. The harsh sirens of the air raids became part of the everyday rhythm of life. Even as houses were leveled and lives lost, the spirit of defiance remained unbroken. People returned to their work, often in the rubble of their homes, determined to rebuild and carry on. Soldiers, too, found themselves in a battle not just of military might, but of survival. The men of the British Expeditionary Force, who had been evacuated from Dunkirk, now stood at the forefront of a war they feared they might lose. The soldiers felt the weight of uncertainty, knowing that the prospect of invasion loomed just across the Channel. The will to fight, to endure, was forged in the hearts of these men and women, a testament to human resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. The Battle of Britain was not simply a test of numbers, it was a contest of tactics and ingenuity. Adapted. The British pilots, flying the iconic Spitfire and Hurricane, used the terrain to their advantage, often engaging the German bombers at precise moments and angles that disrupted their formations. The RAF's use of radar, a revolutionary new technology, played a pivotal role in the battle. It allowed the British to track incoming German aircraft long before they were visible on the horizon, giving them crucial time to scramble their fighters into the air. It was a game-changing advantage that the Germans had not anticipated. In many ways, the Battle of Britain was the first truly modern air war, where technology, tactics, and human resilience combined to create an outcome that defied expectations. The British technological response to the German onslaught was not just reactive, it was innovative. Britain's radar system, based on chain home stations along the southern coast, allowed the RAF to detect incoming bombers and fighters long before they reached British soil. Alongside radar, the Spitfire became the symbol of British air superiority. With its graceful design and unmatched maneuverability, it was a match for the faster, more powerful German aircraft. The Spitfire was not just a machine. It was a symbol of resistance, a tangible representation of Britain's resolve. Another critical element was the deciphering of the German Enigma code. The British codebreakers at Bletchley Park, working tirelessly to crack the Enigma machine's codes, gained access to vital German intelligence. This allowed the Allies to anticipate German movements, disrupt their plans, and gain a critical edge in the war. The work done at Bletchley Park remains one of the war's best-kept secrets, but its impact on the war effort was immeasurable. At the center of Britain's fight for survival was Winston Churchill, whose leadership proved to be a bedrock upon which the nation could stand firm. When he assumed the role of Prime Minister in May 1940, Britain was on the brink of collapse, with the fall of France just days away. But Churchill's unwavering belief in Britain's ability to resist was an anchor in a sea of doubt. Churchill's speeches, delivered with power and conviction, became a rallying cry for both the military and the civilian population. "We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets," he declared in one of his most famous addresses. These words, spoken just after the evacuation of Dunkirk, instilled a sense of unity and purpose in a nation that was exhausted by the relentless threat of invasion. His presence alone was enough to bolster the morale of a beleaguered nation. Where others saw imminent defeat, Churchill saw a battle for survival, and more than that, a battle to preserve the very essence of freedom. His leadership, often characterized by his defiant speeches and unshakable resolve, not only galvanized Britain, but also struck fear into the hearts of the enemy who believed that Churchill's unyielding spirit might be their undoing. While much of the war was waged on battlefields and through strategies, there was a more profound battle, the moral strength of a nation that had already endured years of hardship. Britain's refusal to negotiate peace with Hitler, despite the looming threat of invasion, was not merely a political decision. It was a statement of moral conviction. The British government, under Churchill's leadership, made it clear they would never yield to tyranny. This refusal to capitulate became symbolic, not just for Britain, but for the free world. The moral stance was rooted in the belief that a peace negotiated with Hitler would be no peace at all. It would be a surrender to tyranny, to the values of hatred and oppression that Nazi Germany stood for. Despite the terror, the people did not bend. They rebuilt. They endured. They fought back. From the outset, Germany had underestimated the strength of Britain's resolve. The German officers, particularly those in the upper echelons of the Wehrmacht, believed that the island would capitulate once the Luftwaffe had secured control of the skies. They assumed that, like France, Britain would soon realize that further resistance was futile and would opt for peace. But they did not account for one thing. Despite the pounding of bombs, despite the fear and uncertainty, the invincibility they had enjoyed on the mainland could not be transferred to Britain. Churchill's leadership, combined with the sheer determination of the British people, ensured that Germany's assumptions would be proven false. The idea that Britain would bow to Nazi might was soon shattered. Churchill's speech, calling for Britain to never surrender, would become the defining moment that altered not only the fate of Britain, but the course of the war. The decisive moment arrived on the 20th of August, 1940, a moment that would etch itself into history. By this point, the Battle of Britain had raged for weeks, with German bombers attacking British cities by day and night. The Luftwaffe, under the command of Hermann Göring, believed they were on the cusp of victory. The German strategy was clear: cripple Britain's air defenses, smash its civilian morale, and force it to the negotiating table. But the men and women of Britain had not faltered. Winston Churchill stood at the helm of a nation that refused to bow. But the situation was dire. The German air raids on London were intensifying, the city becoming an inferno of smoke and fire. Its streets reduced to rubble, the sounds of bombers overhead had become a daily terror, but still, Britain endured. For many, the question was no longer whether Britain could defeat the Luftwaffe, it was whether it could survive. In this moment of crisis, Churchill's speech on August 20 would shift the entire course of the conflict. He stood before the British people and made an unequivocal declaration of resolve. The speech, delivered in the House of Commons, addressed not just the immediate situation, but the broader stakes of the war. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few, he said, immortalizing the pilots of the Royal Air Force who had fought so bravely. His words rang out not only across Britain, but to the far corners of the world, offering a message that resonated with every allied nation. Britain would never surrender. The speech was not simply a rallying cry, it was a statement of national identity. It spoke to the very heart of what Britain stood for: defiance in the face of tyranny. Within days, there was a visible shift in British morale. Civilians, once filled with dread and uncertainty, found new resolve. The RAF pilots, already engaged in the fiercest aerial combat the world had ever seen, drew strength from Churchill's message. For the German High Command, the speech marked a turning point in their perception of Britain. The invincible force they had anticipated was now proving to be an immovable obstacle. Britain would not yield. As August turned to September, the Battle of Britain entered its most intense phase. German bombers, having already caused immense damage to London and other cities, turned their focus on RAF airfields and radar stations, hoping to cripple Britain's defensive capabilities once and for all. The Luftwaffe launched wave after wave of attacks, yet the RAF, though heavily outnumbered, fought with a ferocity that defied expectations. With Churchill's stirring words still ringing in their ears, the British pilots, those few, met the Germans in the skies, their Spitfires and Hurricanes swarming over the Channel, clashing with the much larger German formations. The strategic importance of the battle could not be overstated. It was clear that the Luftwaffe's failure to decisively defeat the RAF would mean the postponement, or perhaps even the abandonment, of Operation Sea Lion, the German plan for an invasion of Britain. The stakes were not just military, they were existential. If Britain fell, the entire balance of power in Europe would shift irrevocably in favor of Nazi Germany. The world watched as this fierce aerial contest played out, with the outcome uncertain until the final days of September. The shift in the German strategy became apparent By mid-September, the Luftwaffe began targeting London more heavily, hoping to break the British spirit with an all-out bombing campaign against the city. But what the Germans had failed to calculate was the impact of their actions on British morale. Each bomb that fell, each building that crumbled, only steeled the resolve of the British people. The civilian population, much like the RAF pilots, refused to surrender. They dug in, repaired, rebuilt, and stood firm. On the 15th of September 1940, the tide began to turn. The RAF, despite its depleted resources, successfully repelled a massive German raid, shooting down 56 German aircraft and ensuring that the skies over Britain remained British. This was the turning point, not just in the Battle of Britain, but in the larger struggle for survival. Breaking its will to fight had begun to unravel. From this moment on, it became clear Britain would not capitulate. The Luftwaffe's failure to break the RAF meant that Germany's invasion plans would be delayed indefinitely, if not abandoned altogether. The battle for the skies over Britain, once so uncertain, was now a British victory. As autumn settled over Britain, Churchill's words from August 20 had become prophetic. The battle had been hard fought, but Britain had held its ground. The speech had resonated beyond mere words. It had become a symbol of the nation's unyielding spirit, a clarion call that had rallied the British people to their cause and marked the beginning of the end for the Germans' hopes of conquering Britain. The aftermath of the Battle of Britain marked a crucial shift in the war, both for Britain and for the world. With the Luftwaffe failing to achieve its objective of gaining air superiority, Operation Sea Lion, the German plan for an invasion of Britain, was effectively postponed, and its chances of success became increasingly slim. For the first time in the war, Nazi Germany had suffered a significant defeat, and Britain, though scarred and weary, had emerged with its spirit intact. The RAF's victory in the skies was a monumental achievement, not just in military terms, but in its symbolic value. Britain's successful defense of the island meant that the Nazis could no longer force the country into submission through bombing or air superiority. The defeat of the Luftwaffe marked the first time that Germany's military might had been directly challenged, and it sent shockwaves throughout Europe. The British public, having endured months of terror during the Blitz, Churchill's stirring speeches had given them the courage to continue the fight, and the victory in the skies provided a tangible proof that the war was winnable. For the Germans, the failure to break Britain was a bitter blow. Hitler and his commanders had underestimated the resilience of the British people and the effectiveness of their air defense. The Luftwaffe, despite its vast numbers, had been outmatched by the tactical brilliance of the RAF and the technological advantage provided by radar. More than that, the Germans had failed to achieve their goal of demoralizing the British population. Instead, they had united them in their determination to resist. The psychological warfare that had been a core element of Germany's strategy had backfired. Yet, the cost for Britain was not insignificant. The country had suffered extensive damage, particularly in its cities. London, the epicenter of the Blitz, had been heavily bombed, with thousands of civilians killed or wounded. The economic toll of the war was also mounting, and the war effort, while bolstered by the RAF's success, was far from over. The Battle of Britain was a victory, but the price of that victory was steep. The Blitz would continue for several more months, and the threat of invasion, though now distant, had not been fully eradicated. The victory in the Battle of Britain was not just a military triumph, it was a psychological victory that reverberated across the globe. The outcome of the battle not only thwarted Germany's invasion plans, but also demonstrated that Britain would not easily be cowed. For the Allies, the defeat of the Luftwaffe was a beacon of hope. showing that Nazi Germany was not invincible. The battle proved that with determination, innovation, and leadership, the tide of war could be turned. The victory in the skies above Britain significantly strengthened the resolve of other nations under threat from Nazi Germany. The Soviet Union, still reeling from the brutal onslaught of the German invasion in the East, found inspiration in Britain's resilience. The United States, although still neutral at the time, began to recognize the importance of supporting Britain in its fight against the Axis. While the full-scale American involvement in the war would not come until after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Battle of Britain helped set the stage for the eventual entry of the United States into the war. In Britain itself, the consequences were mixed. The loss of life during the Blitz was immense. Over 40,000 civilians were killed, and hundreds of thousands more were injured. The damage to infrastructure was staggering, and the British economy was under constant strain. However, the moral and strategic victory of the Battle of Britain brought with it a renewed sense of purpose. Churchill's leadership and the resolve of the British people was seen as proof that victory was still possible. In the face of continued bombing raids and the daunting challenge of a long war ahead, from a broader military perspective, the Battle of Britain marked the end of German hopes for a swift victory in the West. With the Luftwaffe unable to secure the skies, Hitler's plans for Operation Sea Lion were shelved. Instead, Germany would turn its attention toward the East, launching Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union in June 1941. This shift in focus, combined with the persistent resistance of Britain, meant that Nazi Germany would be forced to fight a two-front war, a strategic mistake that would ultimately lead to its downfall. In the wake of the Battle of Britain, the British Empire found itself at a crossroads. As the war dragged on, the cost of the conflict would mount, and the very fabric of Britain's empire would be forever changed. However, one thing remained certain. The victory in the skies above Britain in 1940 had ensured that Britain would continue to fight. Churchill's words had rung true. Britain would not surrender, and the world now knew that it was a nation determined to stand against tyranny. The Battle of Britain and Churchill's iconic speech that accompanied it marked not just a turning point in the war, but a defining moment in the history of nations. It was a stand against tyranny that transcended military strategy and technological superiority. It was a testament to the spirit of a people whose will to resist was stronger than the bombs that rained down upon them. The courage of the RAF pilots, the steadfastness of the civilians enduring the Blitz, and the unyielding leadership of Winston Churchill created a foundation upon which the future of the free world was built. For Britain, the victory in the skies was not simply about defeating an enemy. It was about preserving the values of democracy, liberty, and freedom ideals that, in the dark days of 1940, seemed on the brink of extinction. Churchill's words were not just a rallying cry for survival. They were a declaration that the forces of tyranny, no matter how powerful, would not triumph over the human spirit. This moment, so often reduced to historical fact, resonates through the annals of time. The Battle of Britain is remembered not just as a military victory, but as a moral victory, a victory that taught the world that, even in the face of overwhelming odds, courage and resolve can change the course of history. As the war raged on, Britain's resilience would continue to inspire the Allied effort, leading ultimately to the defeat of Nazi Germany and the restoration of peace in Europe. But the lessons of 1940, the importance of standing firm, the power of leadership in moments of crisis, and the strength found in unity would echo long after the last gunshot was fired. The Battle of Britain showed the world that, even in its darkest hour, Britain would never surrender. It was a lesson in resilience that would shape the course of the 20th century and beyond.